Support for today's episode comes from Amazon. Amazon is working toward a carbon-free energy future, doing more with less, investing where it matters most, and supporting communities where we operate. Hydrogen hubs face new political and legal exposure. A federal court stipulation says DOE selected grants for an October 2025 cancellation tranche based solely on the political identity of recipient states. DOE disputes that this describes every underlying termination decision. Either way, the case shows that selection for a major federal program does not guarantee its funding survives a change in administration. A recent federal court stipulation has added a new source of uncertainty to federally supported hydrogen development. The Department of Energy accepted for purposes of the litigation that grants were selected for an October 2025 cancellation tranche solely according to the political identity of their recipient states, rather than any programmatic, statutory cost reduction or performance-based factor. The stipulation specifically addressed how 284 grants were placed in that cancellation tranche. DOE has disputed the broader conclusion that each underlying termination decision was itself politically motivated, saying the filing concerned selection for the October announcement rather than the merits of individual terminations, and courts have not issued a final ruling resolving that dispute. For hydrogen developers, lenders, and investors, the distinction does not eliminate the financing concern. 2 of the 7 regional clean hydrogen hubs selected under the bipartisan infrastructure law were among the awards terminated in that October tranche. And the dispute over how that selection was made shows that winning a federal award is a starting point, not a guarantee that its full multi-year funding survives a change in administration. Winning a federal award no longer ends project uncertainty. The Department of Energy's Regional Clean Hydrogen Hubs program was created through the bipartisan infrastructure law with up to $7 billion in federal funding to accelerate regional hydrogen production, transportation, storage, and end-use infrastructure. 7 hubs were selected across the country in October 2023 to support different production pathways, with funding released in phases, contingent on negotiations and project performance. For many developers, selection represented the beginning of commercial negotiations rather than the end of project uncertainty. In October 2025, DOE terminated award commitments carrying potential federal cost shares of up to $1.2 billion for California's Alliance for Renewable Clean Hydrogen Energy Systems, known as ARCS, and up to $1 billion for the Pacific Northwest Regional Hydrogen Hub, spanning Oregon, Washington, and Montana. Only initial phase funding had actually been dispersed before the cancellations. $30 million for ARCHES and $27.5 million for the Pacific Northwest Hub, out of those much larger potential totals. The other 5 selected hubs were not included in those October cancellations, though their own multi-year funding remains subject to the same phased negotiations and milestones. 2 separate lawsuits, 2 different findings. California Attorney General Rob Bonta led a 13-state coalition in a separate lawsuit filed in February 2026, challenging DOE's cancellation of a wider group of energy and infrastructure awards that included the hydrogen hub terminations, and arguing that the administration exceeded its authority by cutting funding Congress had already appropriated. A different case, Thakur vs. Trump, brought by University of California faculty and researchers, produced the July 2026 stipulation that drew national attention. DOE's principal deputy general counsel wrote in that filing that the selection of grants for the October tranche was based solely on the political identity of the grant recipient's state. Of 624 grants DOE had proposed for termination, 284 were included in the October tranche, and with one exception, all had a recipient or place of performance in a state that both awarded its electoral votes to Kamala Harris in 2024 and had 2 Democratic caucusing U.S. senators. The roughly 340 other grants proposed for termination, involving recipients or project locations in Trump-voting states or states with at least 1 Republican caucusing senator, were not canceled in that round. Regardless of how the underlying legal dispute is resolved, the case shows that even projects backed by congressional appropriations can face extended legal uncertainty before capital is fully deployed. and that the actual criteria behind a funding decision can surface in court long after developers assumed the grant was secure. Policy stability has become a finance issue. Infrastructure investors have long accounted for construction delays, supply chain disruptions, inflation, and permitting challenges. Litigation over federal funding introduces a different kind of unpredictability because it reaches into the foundation of a project's financial structure rather than its execution. Many hydrogen hubs depend on a combination of federal grants, private capital, state incentives, tax credits, and long-term commercial agreements. Questions about whether federal awards will survive administrative review or judicial scrutiny can ripple through financing decisions well beyond the affected project. Lenders may require additional contingencies. Equity investors may delay commitments until legal questions are resolved. For executive teams, the question is no longer simply whether a project can be engineered or permitted. Increasingly, it is whether the policy environment supporting that investment will remain stable throughout development, a planning problem that has already forced CFOs to rank infrastructure bets by political durability, not just return this summer. Hydrogen is the latest example of a broader trend. Hydrogen projects are particularly exposed because they rely on coordinated investments across production, transportation, storage, and industrial demand. Delays affecting one part of the ecosystem can influence the commercial viability of the entire hub, and hydrogen is unlikely to be the only technology where that dynamic plays out. The same federal funding mechanisms support projects involving carbon capture, advanced manufacturing, battery production, grid modernization, critical minerals, and transmission infrastructure. As more projects depend on federal grants and incentive programs, disputes over how those funds are awarded or withdrawn are likely to become a routine part of how companies plan large infrastructure investments, rather than an occasional complication. Federal budget proposals are also shifting support among energy technologies, reinforcing the risk that projects dependent on public funding can face materially different conditions after an administration changes, a reallocation already playing out in a separate set of DOE accounts this year. Litigation is becoming part of infrastructure planning. Federal support remains an important catalyst for emerging energy technologies. Programs such as the Regional Clean Hydrogen Hubs Initiative are intended to reduce commercial uncertainty, accelerate deployment, and encourage private investment in markets that are still developing. Litigation over those same programs is turning into another variable investors must weigh before committing capital. The same kind of sequencing problem already showing up in interconnection timelines that no longer match what capital planning assumed. For companies planning multi-billion-dollar industrial projects, engineering capability, customer demand, and construction expertise remain essential. Increasingly, so is confidence that the public policies supporting those investments will remain durable through changing administrations and extended legal challenges. The courts have not yet resolved the underlying dispute over the October terminations. For executives making long-term capital decisions, the more enduring lesson may be that selection for a federal program is a starting point, not a guarantee, and that funding durability has become another prerequisite for infrastructure investment, alongside the technical and commercial tests that used to define whether a project was ready to build. Sustainability Soundbites Energy Coverage is sponsored by Amazon. Visit the link in our show notes to learn more about Amazon's Spotlight on Energy. For sponsorship opportunities with Environment and Energy Leader, please reach out to a member of our team.